Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Demon Naruto Married with Hinata and Fem Kyūbi Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. The room was lit by only a soft slither of silver moonlight streaming through the window, illuminating a messy blonde-haired child who was sitting cross-legged on his bed. A small sigh escaped Naruto's lips as he concentrated on his meditation. He had taken up these exercises to try and ward off the nightmares that usually plagued his sleep, and much to his surprise it had worked. Mostly. He still woke up in a cold sweat around twice a night on average, but the dreams were slowly getting less lucid. As his mind quieted down and his body relaxed, Naruto began to hear the steady slow dripping of water. Following the sound he soon entered the dank sewers of his mindscape. By now he was no stranger to this place nor the fox who was caged up here. He had been meditating before sleeping for 2 weeks or so now and he had found himself here more often than not. Admittedly he hadn't even found the fox until his third visit, and even now the almost choking aura of evil that surrounded the Kyūbi sent a shiver up his spine, but he wasn't afraid of the fox. In fact, every time he had found himself in the sewer he had sought out the cage and tried to talk to his captive. After all, he reasoned they might as well be friends since they were stuck together. Usually the response he got was nothing more than angry growls and threats, but he had got a few pieces of useful information out of the fox even if it had probably never intended them to be helpful. He turned the corner smiling as the large bars of the gate that held the Kyūbi loomed before him. He walked forward a few steps before pausing. Usually by now he could feel the fox's aura of malice, but it seemed to be missing. He took a few steps closer to the bars, his eyes searching for any sign of the fox, and finding none, his brow wrinkled in concentration. Normally the fox would be pressing itself against the bars in its attempts to attack him or escape. He stood still for a few seconds, concentrating as he attempted to find any signs of where the fox had gone. He heard what sounded like sobbing from beyond the bars, which only served to confuse him more. Who, or what was sobbing? And what were they doing in the fox's seal? He took a deep breath before calling out, "Hello." There was a pause before Naruto picked up a quiet reply of, "Go away," amongst the now quieter sobs. Naruto frowned slightly and walked right up to the bars before pausing yet again. Although he knew the fox couldn't kill him, this had been one of the pieces of information Kyūbi had accidentally let slip. He was still a little wary about stepping into its domain. His curiosity, however, soon overcame his reservation about continuing, and he slipped between the bars, concentrating and conjuring a faintly glowing orb to illuminate his path. Yet another piece of information the Kyūbi had let slip was that he could create whatever he wanted in this place. It was his brain after all. He headed deeper into the almost cloying darkness of the seal, following the sound of crying. Naruto soon found the source of the crying, curled up on the floor in a fetal position, her arms wrapped firmly around her legs as her body heaved with her sobs. A veil of deep red hair covered her face, although Naruto could see tears glimmering in the light of the little orb her had created. She wasn't much older than Naruto himself, maybe 17 or 18, and was wearing a dark red, almost black, dress that hugged her curves. Naruto frowned slightly, feeling a strange fluttering sensation in his stomach and a gentle warmth that seemed to radiate from his chest, and squatted down so his head was level with hers. He hated seeing anyone sad, but for some reason every tear that fell from her cheeks seemed like a dagger to his heart. "Hello," he said, his concern for the woman in front of him evident in his voice. "I'm sorry," was the shocked reply from the girl as she went into a renewed bout of sobbing. "Sorry?" Naruto echoed. "Sorry for what?" "Everything," she replied, raising her head to meet his, her hair parting and letting Naruto see her face. Naruto gasped as his gaze immediately locked onto her eyes, his heart skipping a beat. They were red with black slitted pupils. "You're the fox," he spluttered, noticing the tails that waved behind her for the first time. He had assumed their wavering forms were merely a trick of the light. Kyuubi forced back a blush that threatened to overtake her face as she gazed into his soulful blue eyes. His memories simply couldn't do those eyes justice. Truthfully, she felt a deep compassion for the boy and had, however, briefly contemplated making him her mate. After all, he had all the qualities she desired. He was kind and gentle, yet he had this aura of strength and determination about him that belied his youth. He possessed a mischievous streak that almost rivaled her own, and she knew with the utmost certainty that he would gladly sacrifice his very soul if it meant his partner would be happy. She had, however, refused to dwell on those thoughts. No point getting her hopes up. He may be willing to forgive almost anything, but there was no way he would be able to forgive her for what she had done to his village and the suffering she had caused. Kyuubi nodded. Yes, she said, her voice barely audible. Naruto shook his head in confusion. The fox was a girl. Why was she apologizing? Why did she seem so sad all of a sudden? Why wasn't she threatening him like usual? What were these weird feelings running through his mind? And why did seeing her sad hurt him so much? It was all far too much to take in. You're a girl? He asked dumbly, his mouth seeming to work without any input from his mind. Kyuubi blinked in surprise. She had expected a few things, but that question wasn't one of them. Yes, I am. She confirmed, the faintest hint of humor tinging her otherwise somber tone. Naruto shook his head, clearing the other thoughts aside. So why are you crying? If he knew, maybe he could cheer her up. Kyuubi hung her head again. I've caused so much suffering, she said faintly, to the village but mostly to you. I'm so sorry, Naruto-sama. Naruto's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. He had totally no idea how to respond to what Kyuubi had just told him. For once, the loudest ninja in Konoha was lost for words. He briefly wondered if this was some trick on the fox's part to gain control or hurt him, but his instincts were telling him to trust her, and he always listened to his instincts. After all, if you grew up with almost everyone hating you, then you got good at guessing people's intentions. Why'd you do it? He finally asked after a heavy pause. Kyuubi lifted her head to look at Naruto again. She found no hate in his eyes nor any fear, just curiosity and kindness. That's just it. I don't really know, she said. I was summoned to this realm by another human. There was a pause as she searched for a name. Madara Uchiha, I believe he was called. Then he looked me in the eyes, and all I can remember from then on is red. Only recently has the veil started to lift, but even now it still tries to encroach on my mind. I only know what I've done to you in Konoha through your memories. She sniffed, her tears stopped for now. I know what I've done is inexcusable and I won't bother asking for forgiveness. She lowered her gaze to the floor. I'll accept any punishment you deem fit. Naruto smiled. You're right, he agreed. I can't forgive you. Kyuubi's head sunk lower and she gave a soft sob. Because there's nothing to forgive. Kyuubi's head snapped up, her face the picture of surprise. What? She stuttered, her eyes gazing into his and once again finding no trace of malice. Naruto just gave one of his famous grins. You weren't in control of yourself when you attacked, and you definitely aren't the cause of what happened in my life. His voice darkened slightly, his eyes flashing with suppressed sadness for a second, as he talked about himself, but quickly perked back up as he continued. So there's nothing to forgive, Kyuubi-chan. Kyuubi-chan. Kyuubi repeated incredulously, staring at Naruto, her tears restarting as relief and happiness flooded her mind. Even after all she'd done, he considered her a friend. It was way more than she had even hoped possible. He had forgiven her. Maybe there was some hope after all. Maybe, just maybe, she could become mates with Naruto. A small blush appeared on her cheeks at the thought. Naruto panicked as he saw her tears flowing again. Are you crying because I called you Kyuubi-chan? He said frantically. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. What should I call you? Kyuubi shook her head, a small giggle escaping her lips as the tears continued to fall. No, it's fine, you can call me Kyuubi-chan if you want. Though why are you crying? Whatever I did, I promise I won't do it again, just please stop crying. Naruto continued frantically. He absolutely hated being the one to make people cry, even more so since he had designated Kyuubi-chan as one of his precious people. Kyuubi smiled. Baka. I'm crying because I'm happy. Naruto blinked in surprise and paused. You can do that. Kyuubi gave him another big smile and nodded, causing Naruto's face to light up as he smiled right back. That's weird, he said bluntly. Kyuubi giggled gently. I'm a giant demon fox. Very little about me isn't weird, she pointed out with a slight smirk. Naruto nodded. True. He conceded, a large yawn interrupting him before he could say anything else and causing him to give an embarrassed chuckle. I guess I should go to sleep soon, otherwise I'll be late for school tomorrow. Kyuubi's face flashed with disappointment for only a second before she caught herself, but nevertheless Naruto noticed his grin fading. I'm sorry, he almost whispered, feeling he had somehow let her down. Kyuubi shook her head. It's no problem, I just wanted to talk for a little while longer. She gave him her best grin. Naruto nodded in understanding and fell silent for a second. I'll talk to you first thing in the morning then, he declared, pausing for another second before leaning over and giving Kyuubi an peck on the cheek. His face slightly flashed. Night, Kyuubi-chan, he declared, waving at her and leaving a red-faced and spluttering fox in his wake as he faded from his mindscape. Naruto stretched as he opened his eyes, a silly grin plastered on his face. Leaping to his feet, he quickly shed his clothes and pulled on some pajamas before throwing himself back onto the bed. He was out almost as soon as his head hit the pillow, the grin never leaving his face. Naruto grunted as he slowly lifted his head off the pillow, blinking rapidly as the world swam into focus. Swinging himself off the bed, Naruto made his way towards the shower, shedding his clothes on the way. Stepping inside, he flicked the water on, letting the cold water wake him up fully before he turned it up to a more reasonable temperature. As he stood under the water, he cast his mind back to the night before. The same grin he wore the night before slowly falling back into place on his face. Was that real? He muttered to himself, shaking his head. Only one way to find out. He bounded out of the shower, darting into his room to pull on some boxers before heading to the kitchen and wolfing down a quick breakfast. That done, he headed back into his room, pulling on the rest of his clothes before sitting on the edge of his bed and closing his eyes, in his excitement forgetting everything about normal meditation techniques, and focusing on the sewer in his mind's eye. Naruto opened his eyes, finding himself once again in the sewer that was his mindscape. He looked around, pulling a face. This was no place for someone as nice as Kyuubi-chan to live. He focused on a wall, trying to change its color, and although the wall got a faint blue tinge, there was no other appreciable difference. Naruto frowned and shook his head. Clearly he would need to practice this if he was to give Kyuubi a place she would like living in. Putting this thought aside for the moment, but silently vowing he would practice more later, he made his way towards the fox's cage. As he got closer, his heart began to beat faster. He found himself worrying. What if it had been a dream? What if Kyuubi-chan was back to being a giant evil fox? His face scrunched up in confusion as his determined walking slowed to an amble. Why did he care so much? It certainly wouldn't be the first time someone cared about went missing or betrayed him, so why did the thought that she had fill him with dread? Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, he picked up the pace again, rounding the corner and walking over to the gates, letting loose a breath he hadn't been aware he had been holding when he noted the distinct lack of any malicious aura. As he walked closer, he spotted her figure, curled up and sleeping, just next to the bars of the gate. Upon spotting her, Naruto's grin grew another inch or two, and the heat and fluttering sensations he had felt the other day immediately returned at full force. He advanced slowly, his eyes glued to her form. Her chest was rising and falling slowly, with her breaths and her mouth moving slightly as she mumbled semi-coherently in her sleep. She looked so peaceful, cute, happy, and... Naruto paused, his train of thought derailed as he wondered where that particular thought had come from. Slipping through the bars, he knelt down, reaching out and putting a hand on her shoulder. Pausing for a second, It seemed such a shame to wake her from such an obviously good dream. Before shaking her awake, "Hey Kyuubi-chan, wake up," he said gently. Kyuubi yawned and stretched as her eyes fluttered open, causing Naruto's brain to remind him, much to his chagrin, that Kyuubi was definitely mourning Naruto-sama. Kyuubi muttered tiredly, "What are you doing here so early?" She added as she pushed herself into a sitting position, her dress riding up showing more of her legs and doing nothing to help Naruto keep his mind of her body. Huh. Naruto said. "I promised I'd talk to you in the morning, didn't I? I always keep my promises." He gave Kyuubi a giant grin. Kyuubi returned the smile, feeling her cheeks turning red despite her best efforts. "I know you do," she said softly, "after all I've seen your memories." Naruto blanched slightly. "All my memories? What about when I'm in the shower and stuff?" he said as his face tried to simultaneously drain of color and go red. Kyuubi went bright red as well, shaking her head. "No. I wouldn't. I mean I'd never. I haven't," she spluttered, trying to defend herself. Naruto calmed down her reaction, telling him more than her words would be able to. "Sorry. It just occurred to me that you could have seen." He fell silent, blushed and jerked his head downwards. Kyuubi giggled softly, finding his embarrassment adorable. "I wouldn't look there," she said. "I promise." She smiled. "Unless you asked me to, of course," she added to herself. Naruto smiled and hugged her. "Thanks Kyuubi-chan," he said happily. Kyuubi flushed slightly as she hugged him back, reining in her libido and keeping the hug strictly friendly. Shouldn't you get to the academy, Naruto-sama?" Naruto pouted. "But I wanna talk to you some more." Kyuubi giggled and grinned. "We can still talk, you know," she pointed out, giggling again at the shocked look on Naruto's face. "What? Really? How?" Naruto said, leaning forward, his face mere inches from hers, his eyes shining with barely concealed excitement. Naruto realized how close he was about a second later and his cheeks went a gentle red, however he made no move to pull back. "Just think about telling me what you want to say and I'll hear it," she said. Naruto grinned and hugged Kyuubi tightly. "Awesome." Kyuubi smiled gently. "You really should get to the academy now, Naruto-sama," she reminded him. Naruto nodded. "Oh. Right," he chuckled. "I kinda forgot about that." He shook his head and shot Kyuubi another smile. "Talk to you in a bit," he declared as he faded from sight. Naruto opened his eyes and pushed himself to his feet before running out of his front door, kicking it closer behind him. He never locked it anymore. After all, no one would dare steal from the demon child, and if it was a group out to trash the place, having the door unlocked just meant it wouldn't be broken down. Quickly ascending onto the rooftops as he made his way across town. "So can you hear me, Kyuubi-chan?" he asked, curious. "Yes, I can hear you loud and clear, Naruto-sama," came Kyuubi's response. Naruto pulled a face. It was weird talking to her without being able to see her face, and he found the experience slightly unnerving. "Why do you call me Sama?" he asked, voicing the question that had been bothering him since he had first heard her use the suffix. "Isn't it used for people you respect?" "Why would you respect me?" Kyuubi smiled. "I respect you for staying human and retaining your generosity and drive to help others despite what I've put you through." Naruto frowned as he heard the sadness creeping into her voice. "I already told you it's not your fault," he said. "I can't blame you for what happened, so stop thinking it's your fault. 'Cause from what I heard it was that Madara Tem." Kyuubi giggled at his reply, but no matter what he said, she still felt bad for what the boy had suffered merely for containing her, and the nicer he was to her, the worse she felt for making him suffer. "That's the other reason I respect you. You're not afraid of me. You don't see me as a demon like other humans, nor as the queen of demons like the rest of my kind. You just see me as Kyuubi." Naruto's eyes widened in shock and he stumbled slightly as he landed on a roof, almost slipping and falling to the street below. "You're the queen of demons," he spluttered aloud. "Yeah, well, I was. Someone else has probably taken my place by now." Kyuubi responded, suppressing giggles at his response. She had heard his verbal outburst because, like the thought speech, it was directed at her. Naruto chuckled. Wow. That's awesome. I bet you looked great with all the fancy dresses and stuff. Kyuubi went red at his offhand compliment, silently glad he couldn't see her face. I guess I did, she responded as she regained her composure. I was never really one for all the stupid dresses and things. Naruto grinned as he vaulted into the tree in the academy playground, training grounds, then onto the ground before running into the building straight for the classroom, ignoring the glares from most of the teachers and other pupils he passed in the hallway. In his head, Kyuubi growled to herself. She knew everyone hated Naruto, but seeing memories and seeing it for real were two very different things. She felt her angry rise with each angry glare that was sent Naruto's way, and each time she got angrier, the veil of red got harder and harder to resist. Catching herself before she fell back under the genjutsu's influence, she took several deep, calming breaths. Naruto didn't let them get to him, so she too could ignore the glares, although she silently swore to herself to get slow, painful revenge on each and every person that hurt the man she loved. She paused. Did she love him? She mulled over how she felt around him. He made her feel wanted, needed even, and he could make her blush and stutter with just a compliment. Her, the queen of all demons. She was thousands if not millions of years old. It was a bit hard to remember everything, all seemed to blur together after the first eon or so, yet he made her feel alive in a way she knew very little if anything about. Yes, if this wasn't love, she didn't know what was. Naruto stepped into the classroom, giving a relieved sigh as he saw people just settling into their seats. He wasn't late. Iruka chuckled. You cut it really close today, Naruto. Naruto gave Iruka a huge grin. Yeah. But I'm not late, am I? Iruka sighed and shook his head, although a smile tugged at his lips. Alright, go sit down. Inside his head, Kyuubi was scanning the class and putting each person to the memories Naruto had of them. She giggled slightly as she spotted Hinata. The girl obviously had a huge crush on her host, although he seemed totally oblivious. She smiled softly. Maybe she could try and get them together after all. Naruto, more than anyone she had ever met, deserved to be happy. Even if making him happy meant putting aside her own love for the boy, she was willing to do it. Naruto walked over towards his usual seat. Wait, Kyuubi spoke up, causing Naruto to pause. What is it? He asked. Don't sit there, Kyuubi asked gently. Naruto's brow crinkled in confusion. Why? And where should I sit then? He replied. Just sit in the back next to the girl with the large coat. Kyuubi supplied. Hinata. Naruto said, his gaze moving over to lock onto the shy girl who shrank into her jacket as she felt Naruto's eyes fall on her, her face glowing a gentle pink. Okay then. He shrugged and turned before heading up and sitting down next to Hinata. Good morning, he said with a smile pulling on his, admittedly small, knowledge of manners to greet her. She was a Hyuga after all. Hinata's response was going bright red and giving a quiet, eep. Her Naruto was sitting next to her. And he was talking to her. Naruto chuckled quietly at her response. Strangely, he could feel the butterflies and warmth that he usually felt when talking with Kyuubi. He had never noticed how pretty she was. Especially when she was blushing like this. Wait, what was he thinking? This was just like that time with Kyuubi-chan. But Hinata wouldn't want to be his friend. After all, she was a Hyuga. If he remembered correctly, the Hyuga heir even. And he was just a demon. You don't mind me sitting here, do you? He asked nervously, noticing Hinata appeared to be trying to avoid his eyes, forcing his smile to stay in place despite the imminent rejection. Hinata shook her head. No, she stuttered. I want you to see, sit here. Naruto gave Hinata a huge grin. She actually wanted to sit next to him. He had found someone to add to the, admittedly short, list of those who didn't outright hate him. Cool, thanks, he said happily. Hinata sat in her seat desperately trying to think of something to say. He was right there. Maybe she should tell him how she felt. But then, what if he rejected her? No. No, he was too kind for that, he wouldn't say no. But then if he was just dating her for pity? She definitely deserved his pity. She was weak and useless, her father said so practically every day. Why would someone like Naruto want to go out with a failure like her? No, it was better to just stay silent. Naruto frowned as he saw Hinata's face fall. What's wrong? He asked. Have I done something? He added, like with Kyuubi, he could almost feel a knife turning in his heart at the thought he had made Hinata cry. She opened her mouth to speak, but all that came out was a faint squeak before she shut it again. She couldn't tell Naruto what was wrong. Come on, Hinata. Naruto said as loud as he dared now that class was underway. Iruka was blabbering on about kunai throwing or something. Naruto didn't care. Hinata was much more important, please. He pleaded desperately when his response from Hinata was a strangled sob and her face falling another half an inch or so. His grin slipped off his face. Hinata-san, please don't be sad. I can't bear seeing you sad. I'm sorry for whatever I did. Just please be happy again. Hinata gave another small sob as she realized she was upsetting Naruto. I can't do anything right. Father was right, I am a total failure, she lamented. I'm so sorry, she sobbed gently. Naruto was almost tempted to laugh when he heard those words leave Hinata's mouth. This was turning out to be almost exactly like his first meeting with Kyuubi-chan. Sorry for what? I'm the one who made you cry, Hinata-san. He grabbed her shoulders and stared into her eyes, Hinata's cheeks turning bright red as she gave a little meep of surprise. Naruto just stared into her eyes, unable to break his gaze away, a blush slowly forming on his cheeks. She had such beautiful eyes. I just want to see you smile. I bet you look really pretty when you do. Hinata's blush got deeper, one thought bouncing around her head. Naruto-kun said I was pretty. Her sadness forgotten for the moment, she gave Naruto a small smile. Thank you, she said softly. Naruto chuckled, rubbing the back of his head. No need to thank me, it's the truth. Inside his head, Kyuubi was giggling softly. He's a natural at this, she muttered to herself. Hinata's face went redder still and she opened her mouth to reply, but finding herself unable to make more than a little squeak. Naruto. Iruka's voice cut across Hinata's attempts to reply. Huh, what? Naruto's head snapped round to look at Iruka, causing a wave of subdued laughter to ripple through the classroom. Iruka sighed. I asked you a question, Naruto. He said, but I'm just going to assume you weren't listening and repeat it. Can you give me an example of a jutsu for each element? Naruto blanched. Damn. Not good, not good. I can only think of a fire jutsu. His panic was interrupted by Kyuubi. Don't worry, Naruto-sama. I know a few thousand jutsu. I'm sure I can give you some examples. Naruto's face lit up, his eyes widening with shock and awe. Woo, he muttered, really? Kyuubi nodded the affirmative, giggling at how he perked up at the mention of jutsu. There was a pause before she realized he couldn't have seen her nod. Yes, she said, giggling at herself now. Can you teach me? Naruto asked hopefully. Kyuubi smiled gently. Sure, I'll teach you anything you want to know. Naruto was basically bouncing off the walls with excitement. Awesome. Thanks, Kyuubi-chan. You're the best. Kyuubi giggled and shook her head. Shouldn't you answer Iruka's question now? Naruto blinked. Oh right, I forgot about that. He rubbed the back of his head and chuckled. Iruka had been watching Naruto in shock. Naruto had been panicking when he had asked him that question, but to be honest he wasn't that surprised. No one except maybe Sasuke or Sakura should have been able to give him a full set of examples, but then something odd had happened and Naruto's face had gone from panic to calm, then shock, and now the boy appeared to be brimming with energy. He had only seen Naruto this full of energy when the class had started learning the academy jutsu. Naruto grinned. Alright Uruka-sensei, I've got the examples. For fire there is the Grand Fireball Jutsu. Water has the Water Dragon Jutsu. Earth could be the Stone Spike Jutsu and lightning would be Static Blast Jutsu. He grinned. That's right, isn't it Uruka-sensei? Uruka stared at Naruto for a few seconds before regaining his composure. The rest of the class was still staring at Naruto as if he'd grown a second head. Well, except Hinata, who was watching him with a serene smile on her face. Yes, that's right, he said slowly. Where did you learn that? Naruto opened his mouth to answer, but Kyuubi spoke up before he could. Don't tell them that we can talk. She warned, terrified of what would happen to Naruto if it became public knowledge that he and the demon could communicate freely. Naruto gave a sad smile. I wasn't going to. I don't really even want to imagine what they would do to us if they knew we could talk. He half wanted to give Kyuubi a comforting grin or hug, but without entering his mindscape he couldn't. You know me, Uruka-sensei. Naruto grinned at Uruka. I just love to learn about jutsu. His answer made most of the class chuckle again and shake their heads. It made sense now how Naruto, the worst in the class, knew something they didn't. Uruka frowned. He had noticed the pause before Naruto had spoken, like he was talking to himself, or maybe something inside him. Had Naruto begun talking to the nine-tailed fox? He gave Naruto a smile and forced a small chuckle. Oh right, I guess I should have seen that coming. He replied, making a mental note to see the Hokage at the next opportunity. So exactly how many jutsu do you know then? Naruto paused for a second. I know about 100. He gave Uruka a huge grin followed by a pout. But no one'll teach me how to use them. Hey, what am I? Chopped liver. Kyuubi pouted playfully. Oh, I'm sorry Kyuubi-chan. I thought you knew I was lying. Naruto apologized quickly. Kyuubi giggled. I was just joking, I knew you were. Naruto laughed. Oh right. Sorry. Uruka chuckled and nodded, going back to teaching, although he decided to keep his eye on Naruto. The kid was definitely acting weird. Naruto smiled and turned his attention back to Hinata. Want to meet up sometime so we can talk and get to know each other better? Is Naruto-kun asking me on a date? Hinata thought, her face slowly rising through the shades of red as she pondered the question. Like a date. She asked softly, looking at Naruto with wide hopeful eyes. Naruto considered it for a second and nodded, chuckling. Sure, I guess you could call it a date. Hinata's face managed to find another 2 shades of red as he blush deepened. Hi Naruto-kun, would love to. She replied. That settled it. This was definitely a dream. She would wake up soon and life would be back to normal. Naruto grinned. Naruto-kun? He asked, slightly amused at the sudden addition of the suffix, although hearing her use it did send a pleasant warm feeling radiating out from his stomach. Hinata froze. Had she called him Naruto-kun out loud? She stuttered, trying to find an excuse. Naruto grinned. Don't worry about it, Hinata-chan. I'm fine with you calling me Naruto-kun. Hinata would have replied, but she didn't trust her ability to speak right now, so she made do with a nod and a small smile. So anyway, meet at Ichiraku's tomorrow. Like 4-ish. Hinata gave a gentle giggle. She should have known they'd be going to Ichiraku's after all. Ramen was second only to oxygen for Naruto. Sure, she said, smiling. I'll meet you there. Naruto beamed. Great. He said happily, a slight blush on his cheeks. He loved seeing Hinata smile. Why didn't you ask her to meet you today? Kyuubi voiced her thought. Oh right. Naruto chuckled. Well, tomorrow is the weekend, so we'll have more time. And I was kinda hoping we could start training today. She didn't need to see him to know he was giving her a hopeful, pleading look. Sure. We can start after school if you want, she replied. Thanks. You're the best, Kyuubi-chan. Naruto grinned happily. The rest of the day passed in relative normality. Although Kyuubi had jumped in as his sensei when a few of the teachers had tried to teach him taijutsu wrong, Naruto smirked at the memory of the looks on their face when he ignored them and took up a proper taijutsu stance. He made a mental note to thank Kyuubi later as he walked back down the corridor and slipped into Uruka's classroom. "Hey Uruka-sensei," he said smiling. Uruka looked up from his paperwork. "Oh. Hello Naruto-kun, what are you doing here?" Naruto gave a sheepish grin. I kinda have a question I want to ask." Uruka nodded. Maybe this would help him understand Naruto's sudden strange behavior. "I'm listening," he said. "What is it?" "Well, when I'm talking to a few people I feel really weird." "Is there something wrong with me?" Naruto asked, a little concerned since normally Kyuubi-chan fixed him up, but this time it wasn't going away. If anything, it got stronger each time he talked or saw them. Uruka nodded. "Are these people girls?" he asked, a small grin tugging at his lips. Naruto nodded, confused. "Yeah. Why?" Uruka's grin grew. "What do you feel?" Naruto frowned. "I feel like I'm nervous, you know, butterflies in the stomach kinda thing, and there's also this weird warm feeling in my chest. It's not a bad warmth, it feels really nice." By now Uruka was sporting a giant grin, and you find yourself thinking that they're pretty without meaning to. He questioned. Naruto's eyes widened and a blush appeared on his cheeks. "Yeah. Kinda. But how did you know?" Uruka chuckled. "Don't worry, there's nothing wrong with you Naruto," he said, giving a small sigh of relief. Naruto hadn't been talking to the fox, he'd just been love-struck. Uruka's grin would have grown another inch or so if it could as he went over the lesson. Naruto had fallen for Hinata. That was why he paused before going to sit next to her and why he kept zoning out during the lesson. He must have been trying to impress her with his knowledge when he answered the question as well. Now that he had worked out the truth, Uruka felt slightly bad about jumping to a conclusion, especially since it involved the fox. He had sworn he would never let the fact Naruto contained it affect his views of the boy, but that was what had happened. "Then what is it?" Naruto demanded. "It's quite simple really." Uruka explained. "You're in love." Naruto frowned. "What?" "No, I love you and the old man, and Ichiraku-san, and this feels totally different." Uruka blinked in surprise. "You love me?" he asked, surprised and honored. "Yeah, of course." Naruto smiled. "You actually care about me?" Uruka gave a small sad smile. It made him sad and angry to know that so few people actually cared about Naruto, that he'd love each one who did unconditionally. Anyway, it's not the same. There are two different types of love. Naruto's frown deepened. "What do you mean?" Uruka smiled. "You love me like a brother or a father. It's familial love, but those girls you have a romantic love for." "Romantic love?" Naruto asked, confused. Uruka sighed. "Like a boyfriend loves and girlfriend," he offered. Naruto nodded. "Oh," he said, blushing slightly. "So how many girls make you feel like this?" Uruka pushed. Naruto paused. "Just two," he replied. "Why? Is it important?" Uruka chuckled slightly. "Well, I don't really like to be the bearer of bad news, but you'll have to pick one of them if you want to have a relationship." Naruto blanched. "What? Why? So I have to stop talking to one of them?" Uruka shook his head. It was both endearing and sad that Naruto was so socially stunted. "No, you can still be friends with them both, but you can only have one girlfriend." "Oh right." Naruto replied to Uruka, blushing slightly at the thought of Hinata or Kyuubi as his girlfriend, although he had no idea how he'd ever be able to make that choice. "Naruto-sama," Kyuubi spoke up. "Can we have a chat after this?" Naruto gave a small nod. Sure Kyuubi-chan." Uruka smiled. "I hope I helped," he said. Naruto nodded. "Yeah, you did. Thanks Uruka-sensei." He gave Uruka a big grin. Uruka smiled back. "No problem. If you ever need any help or advice, feel free to ask me." Naruto nodded. "Okay. Well, see ya," he said, waving Uruka goodbye as he headed back home. Naruto quickly ascended back onto the rooftops as he headed back home. You wanted to talk? He asked. Yeah, but I meant I want to talk to you actually in your mindscape, Kyuubi replied, feeling slightly silly for not specifying earlier. Naruto chuckled. Oh right, sure. He vaulted round a chimney to quickly change his direction whilst maintaining most of his momentum. What do you want to talk about? Two things really. Kyuubi spoke up. Firstly, I want to talk about what Iruka told you. Both parties were grateful they couldn't see each other at that particular point in time. Kyuubi because of the large blush that had spread across her cheeks, and Naruto because his face had drained of color. And also, I want to test something. If it works, then we can significantly speed up your training in certain areas. Naruto nodded. What is it? And how can it speed up my training? Kyuubi giggled. I'll tell you when we get home. Naruto pouted. Ah, come on, Kyuubi-chan. Tell me now. Why? Kyuubi replied, giggling. What'll you do for me if I do? Naruto slowed down slightly as he thought. What do you want? He finally asked, unable to think of anything he could give her. Kyuubi was silent for a moment as she mulled over what to ask for. She briefly considered asking for freedom and few other more private things that brought a blush to her cheek. I guess a nice long hug would be nice. She finally decided with something halfway between a smirk and an embarrassed grin on her face. Naruto laughed and nodded. Sure. He agreed happily. So what's this thing that could help me train? Well, we both know you retain memories from your mindscape, so I was wondering if it's possible for you to come here at night and train your mind whilst your bod rests. Naruto's face lit up. Wow, he mumbled, really? Will it work? Kyuubi gave a small sigh. That's the problem. I'm not really sure what you can and can't learn in your mindscape. Naruto frowned. What do you mean? He asked as he landed on the porch of his apartment. Well, obviously you can't train physically, so you can't get stronger or faster or anything. Kyuubi explained, but you might be able to learn taijutsu styles. You can almost definitely learn information like history or things like that. Naruto pulled a face at that, and I'm not sure about jutsu either. Naruto frowned. Why wouldn't I be able to learn jutsu? He questioned, pushing open the door and walking into the bedroom, flopping onto the bed. Well, Kyuubi began before Naruto cut her off. Wait a second, I'll join you shortly. He grinned and closed his eyes, easily locating the rhythmic dripping and entering his mindscape. Naruto stretched slightly and walked down the corridor towards the large gates, grinning and waving as he saw Kyuubi waiting for him in the other side, her tails waving behind her excitedly. Hello, Naruto-sama. She said happily, waving back at Naruto as he slipped through the bars in the gate. Naruto grinned. Hey Kyuubi-chan, he replied. Anyway, what were you saying? Kyuubi paused for a second. You might not be able to learn jutsu because this is your mind, she said, glancing at Naruto, and seeing the blank look on his face, she decided to elaborate. Put simply, it's very hard to teach you a jutsu because even if you get it wrong, the effect could happen anyway. It's your mind, so you're in control. That means there's basically no way of telling if you've learnt the jutsu properly or wrong. Naruto frowned slightly. Huh. He muttered. Kyuubi chuckled under her breath. Alright, let's try this, she muttered. Alright Naruto, would you like to try a jutsu? Naruto nodded eagerly. Yes. He called out. Kyuubi nodded, a slight smirk on her face. Alright, let's try the Grand Fireball Jutsu. Naruto's grin grew another inch. Really? He asked happily. Kyuubi smiled. I'll show you the hand signs, then you can give it a go. She slowly went through about 10 hand signs as Naruto watched her transfixed. Got it? She asked. Naruto nodded, his grin fading into a determined look. Yeah, he said, flashing through a quick series of hand signs. He took a deep breath and let loose a massive fireball. There was a heavy pause as Naruto just stared blankly at the air in front of him, completely taken aback by how quickly he had learnt that jutsu. Wow, he muttered, turning to Kyuubi. I guess I can learn jutsu in here after all, huh? He laughed. Kyuubi shook her head. Sorry, but you can't, she said. Naruto frowned. What do you mean? Look at this. He took another deep breath, flashing through hand signs, and released yet another huge fireball into the air. I call that learning jutsu. Kyuubi sighed. The hand signs I taught you were wrong for that jutsu, and you used different hand signs to the ones I taught you. She explained, sounding a little sad she had to ruin Naruto's fun. In fact, the second time you did it, you used completely different hand signs to the first. You just wanted it to work so badly it did. Naruto's face fell, his mouth in a silent O as he took the information in. I can still learn other things though? He asked. Kyuubi giggled slightly and nodded. Yeah, you can. Naruto grinned. So can we get started with my training now? He asked excitedly, almost bouncing in place in his excitement. Kyuubi smiled warmly. Not quite yet. I'd like to talk about your talk with Iruka-san. Naruto flushed slightly. Oh right. Okay. He gave her a small smile, although he was more than a little worried about this conversation. Kyuubi read his eyes easily, seeing the worry there. Can you tell me who those girls that make you feel like that are? She asked. If you don't want to, I understand, and I promise I won't look into your mind to find out. Naruto nodded. Well, there are only two people who make me feel like that. There's Hinata-chan and you, Kyuubi-chan. Naruto tensed up, afraid that Kyuubi would reject him or leave, or any number of other scenarios his mind threw at him. Kyuubi froze for a second, her heart almost exploding with joy. Naruto loved her. She glanced at him, seeing the fear in his eyes, and smiled. I feel the same about you too, Naruto, she said gently, a blush coloring her cheeks a soft shade of pink. Naruto's face slowly split into a grin as what Kyuubi said sank in. You mean it? He asked, all the energy he had earlier immediately bubbling back to the surface. Kyuubi nodded. Yes, I mean it. And I think Hinata also feels the same way about you. The information seemed to have the opposite effect on Naruto than Kyuubi as his face fell. Oh. He muttered, she does. Kyuubi frowned. Yeah, I mean she's obviously quite shy, but it's fairly easy to spot if you know what to look for. Why? I thought that would make you happier, not upset. Naruto looked up, giving Kyuubi a grin, although she could tell it was faked. Believe me, I'm really happy that both of you like me. Kyuubi frowned slightly at that. Why wouldn't he say they loved him? Was it that hard to believe? But I don't want to hurt either of you or make anyone sad, and Iruka-sensei said I'd have to pick one of you. His face seemed to drop again. How am I going to decide? And how can I do it without hurting either of you? Kyuubi nodded, her blush getting a little stronger. Iruka wasn't necessarily correct, she said. Naruto's eyes widened and his grin returned in full force. What do you mean? He asked hopefully. Well, in my realm, having more than one mate is not uncommon. In fact, it's quite unusual for anyone in a position of power to have less than 3. She explained, watching Naruto's face to try and judge his reaction. Mates? Naruto asked. Aren't they friends? Kyuubi giggled. That is one meaning, but for demons, and a few clans of humans, a mate is the rough equivalent of a wife in your culture. Naruto nodded. So I won't have to pick between you and Hinata-chan? He asked. Kyuubi nodded. But Hinata-san has to agree as well. She may not like the idea of sharing you. Naruto's face fell. He hadn't thought of that. But from what I've seen, I really don't think that'll be a problem. Naruto looked at Kyuubi. Why? How do you know what she'll do? Kyuubi giggled slightly. You'll understand eventually. She offered, giggling harder as Naruto pouted. That's not a proper answer, he complained. Kyuubi shook her head. Oh, by the way, I believe you owe me a hug. She grinned. Naruto chuckled and nodded. I know, he said, stepping forward and enveloping Kyuubi in a hug, his cheeks flushing a gentle pink. A soft, almost inaudible sigh escaped Kyuubi's lips as she relaxed into Naruto's arms, her own cheeks ever so slightly redder than Naruto's. I could get used to this. She mumbled contentedly to herself. Naruto nodded. Yeah, it's nice. He agreed with a grin, Kyuubi's face going from light pink to red in an instant as she heard him. She hadn't said that out loud, had she? They stayed in each other's arms for a few moments more, both parties slightly reluctant to part but trying to hide it. Naruto was the to break the slightly awkward silence left in the hug's wake. So shall we start training? He asked, rubbing the back of his head, a slight blush gracing his cheeks. Kyuubi nodded, glad that Naruto had been the one to break the silence. Sure. Go back to your body and find somewhere where we won't be interrupted. Naruto frowned slightly. Why? Can't I just use the training grounds? Kyuubi shook her head. I want to teach you to use my chakra as well as your own, and I will be teaching you special demon jutsu and styles. Naruto's eyes widened and he dove at Kyuubi, wrapping his arms around her. Thank you. He yelled ecstatically. Kyuubi blushed and smiled, rubbing Naruto's head with one hand as the other around him to return the hug. Don't worry about it, it's the least I can do, she responded. Naruto smiled happily, although his mind was working frantically to try and decipher what he was feeling. He felt warm and safe in her arms, almost exactly like how he felt when the old man hugged him after something bad happened. But there was something more. It wasn't exactly hunger, but he knew he wanted something, he just couldn't work out what that something was. Kyuubi gave a little contented sigh, the small noise breaking Naruto out of his train of thought, and he looked up, realizing what they were doing and how close they were. A soft blush appeared on his face, and he slowly extracted himself from her arms, avoiding her eyes, unsure of what to do. Emotions he wasn't used to feeling bouncing around his head. He wanted to change the subject. Shall we go train? He asked. Kyuubi nodded. Sure, she agreed with a gentle smile, inwardly frowning at how obviously uncomfortable Naruto was when he received compassion. Come back in here once you find a good training spot. Naruto nodded. Sure, he agreed, giving Kyuubi a grin. See you in a bit, Kyuubi-chan. He waved at her as he faded out of the mindscape, bringing himself back into the real world. Pushing himself up of the bed, Naruto stretched out his muscles. His legs had fallen asleep whilst he had been talking to Kyuubi, shaking them a bit more to restore full mobility. He grinned and headed for the door, pausing only to pull his shoes before flying out the door and vaulting onto the roof of his apartment. Pausing on the roof, he looked around, trying to decide where to go to train. Kyuubi-chan had told him it would have to be far away from the village to avoid anyone detecting her chakra and coming to kill the demon, or causing a panic. Making up his mind, he grinned, dashing along the rooftops of the village, heading towards the Hokage monument. Didn't take Naruto too long to reach the location he had in mind. Although the vast number of steps he had to climb to get to the top of the monument certainly did his time no favors, he grinned as he entered the large forest that backed the village. All he would need to find now would be a clearing to train in, then he could get down to business and start his training. Wandering through the ever-increasing density of trees, he searched for any area of open ground that would be big enough to allow for any kind of training Kyuubi-chan had in mind for him. He gave a heavy sigh as after another half an hour of searching, the only break in the trees he had found was where a small stream had wound its way through the forest, and that was useless after all. He couldn't train in a stream, could he? He growled in frustration, his hand clenching into a fist as he struck out at a tree, getting only a throbbing fist for his troubles. Naruto, Kyuubi spoke up, seeing him about to give up. Huh? Yeah. Naruto asked, his voice falling from angry to slightly depressed. I'm sorry I couldn't find anywhere to train. I let you down. No, you did fine, Kyuubi supplied. We can start your training here. Naruto perked up instantly. Really? But there are trees everywhere. Kyuubi nodded. Yeah, we're going to be working on your chakra control. Naruto pouted and frowned. That's boring, he whined. I want to learn jutsu. Kyuubi giggled. I know you do, but we need to work on your control first, otherwise you could end up blowing yourself up or any number of other awful things. Naruto frowning and sighed. Fine, I'll do the stupid control training. He pouted and pointed an accusing finger and Kyuubi. But you have to teach me a really awesome jutsu next training session. Kyuubi giggled harder. Alright, I'll teach you something good next time. Naruto's face lit up. If Kyuubi continued as Naruto's face dropped again, you do well today. Naruto pouted again. Ah, komon Kyuubi-sensei. Kyuubi smiled. I know you'll define, so don't worry. Naruto gave a small smile. Thanks. He said happily, so what do I do? Kyuubi grinned. His reaction was going to be good. I want you to climb a tree without using your hands. Naruto frowned. That's impossible. I thought you were going to train me. Kyuubi giggled. It's possible. Just send chakra to your feet and use it to stick to the tree. Naruto nodded and paused, staring at the tree as he focused on his feet, a bright blue glow emanating from beneath him. So I just need to use my chakra to stick to the tree. He double-checked as he lifted his foot. Kyuubi smiled. Yeah, that's it. You can do it with any surface, even ceiling, with practice. Naruto grinned. This was great. He almost forgave her for not teaching him any new jutsu today. Almost. He placed his foot on the tree and pushed the chakra out into the tree bark. There was a bright blue flash and Naruto was blown backwards, smashing into another nearby tree with a loud crash. The tree he had tried to climb had a deep imprint in the rough shape of Naruto's foot, with several hairline fractures running jagged lines from the imprint. He groaned as he pushed himself away from the tree, Kyuubi's chakra running to the multitude of small splinters in his back and arms, pushing the pieces of wood from his body and then sealing the holes. Ah! Naruto grumbled, shaking his head to try and reduce the painful throbbing where it had impacted the tree. What happened? Kyuubi restrained the urge to laugh. She had known Naruto was using too much chakra, but she hadn't imagined anything like this happening. You use too much chakra. She explained simply. Too much and you go flying. Just like that. And too little and you won't stick properly. That's why this is such a good way of practicing control. Naruto frowned and grumbled as he dusted himself off, turning to another, so far undamaged, tree and focusing as little chakra as he could into his feet. This time the glow was softer and much less bright. Bringing his foot up, he placed it on the tree trunk only to be pushed back again. This time there was no flash and his efforts left only a small spider web crack in the bark where his foot had been. He stumbled backwards, catching his footing fairly quickly and steadying himself. You still used too much. Kyuubi supplied helpfully, her voice slightly strained with restrained laughter. Naruto growled in annoyance. That was a small amount of chakra. He exclaimed. Kyuubi shook her head. No, it wasn't, it was quite a lot of chakra. Naruto frowned. It was the smallest amount I could bring up. Kyuubi sighed. His control was far worse than she had expected. This was going to be a long day. Naruto yawned as he woke up, blearily glancing at the clock on his side. He smiled. He still had an hour until his date with Hinata. Not bad considering Kyuubi hadn't decided to call it a night until well after the sun had risen. Pushing himself up, he rolled off the bed, landing on the floor, a pained hiss escaping his lips. His training with Kyuubi had apparently left him with both fairly bad chakra burns on his feet and extremely sore muscles in his legs. Although he had to admit the results were impressive. Walking over to the wall, he focused the chakra at his feet and took 2 steps up the wall just to make sure he had remembered how to do it. Dropping to the floor, he flinched at the pain that accompanied the impact, then grinned. The pain was definitely worth the results. Hey Kyuubi-chan, you up? He asked quietly lest he accidentally wake his friend and teacher. He stood still, listening intently for any reply, and when none was forthcoming he just chuckled and shook his head. Guess not. He mumbled, slightly amused, and she wasn't even the one doing the training. A short while later Naruto stepped out of the shower, rubbing the last of the water out of his hair as he wandered back into his bedroom. Opening up his closet, he quickly pulled on a pair of boxers, tossing the towel over his shoulder and into the washing basket. He quickly donned a pair of black jeans and a simple black t-shirt. The t-shirt was rather tight since it was about a size too small, but he simply didn't have the available cash to replace it with something that fitted properly. That done, he paused, turning on his heels, his gaze falling on the familiar orange jacket that rested at the foot of his bed. He paused in thought. He had been told often enough that the jacket was ugly, and truth be told he had always found it a little bright for his tastes, but he wore it diligently because it was the only connection he had ever had with his parents. Apparently he had been left on the doorstep of the orphanage wrapped up in the jacket. Finally deciding that if this was going to be a date, then he wanted to look nice for Hinata, and wearing a jacket that everyone agreed was awful probably wasn't the way to do that. He left the jacket in its place at the foot of his bed and slipped on his shoes. Glancing again at the clock, he found he still had easily 30 minutes to kill before he had to meet up with Hinata, and he knew that Ichiraku was only a 10-minute run from his apartment. Glancing downwards at his feet, he grinned. I guess a little more training couldn't hurt, he muttered before looking up at the ceiling. Kyuubi-chan had said he'd be able to walk on the ceiling, so he decided he'd give it a quick go. Hinata stood outside Ichiraku's, nervously ringing with her hands as she waited for her Naruto-kun to arrive. She was wearing her normal outfit complete with the thick top. She had wanted to come without it, but she just couldn't. The mere thought of all those eyes looking at her body made her skin crawl and her face flush a gentle red. She glanced up at the sun. It was about 4. Naruto should be here any moment. Her eyes dropped back down to the street as she scanned for any sign of her crush. Up above them on the rooftops, Naruto smiled as he glanced down and saw Hinata. He couldn't believe how much time being able to walk along walls had cut off his journey. He had been sure he would be late, waiting for him. Giving a small relieved sigh, there had been a part of him insisting she wouldn't show up. Charging his feet with some chakra, he took a step of the side of the building, swinging down so he was standing on the wall. A huge grin broke out on his face. He would never get tired of wall walking. As he strolled down the wall towards Hinata, the girl remaining oblivious to his presence as she continued to search the busy streets for him. Hey Hinata-chan, Naruto said happily as he reached the ground. Hinata gave a surprised yelp and spun round. Oh. Oh, hey. Naruto-k. Naruto-kun. She greeted him. When did you get here? Her face lighting up at his mere proximity, she immediately noticed he wasn't wearing the orange jacket that had almost become his trademark. Naruto gave a small chuckle. I took the rooftops, he said, rubbing the back of his head. Hinata nodded, feeling more than a little stupid for not even looking there. Why? And where's why? Your jacket. Naruto grinned. You know the way people treat me. If I take the rooftops, then I can mostly avoid it, he said dismissively, although Hinata could detect the slight darkening of his tone, although it immediately picked back up as he continued. As for the jacket, he gave a small smile. I wanted to look nice for you, and everyone always says it looks bad, so. He trailed off with a shrug. Hinata nodded, feeling a little weak at the knees, Naruto's grin coaxing a small grin onto her own face. Oh, okay. She replied, frowning at herself. Naruto-kun had made an effort to look good. He had even forsaken his favorite jacket, for her. And she hadn't even had the courage to get rid of her own jacket. Hinata's guilt trip was cut short as Naruto smiled, grabbing her hand. Let's go inside, he said happily. Hinata's face lit up when she felt Naruto's strong hand wrap around her own. Hi. She agreed. Why do you stutter so much, Hinata-chan? He asked offhandedly. Hinata froze. Sorry Naruto-kun. She said sadly, thinking Naruto didn't like her stuttering. Just can't help it. Naruto frowned as he saw her face falling. He recognized that look. She thought he was going to reject her or be mean. Doing the only thing he could think of to comfort her, he drew her into a hug. I like your stuttering, Hinata-chan. And when you blush. It just makes you look cuter. He gave her his best smile. Hinata's face turned a dark red and small squeak escaped her lips. Naruto-kun was hugging her. And he said she was cute. She felt faint, her legs buckling slightly as she let Naruto support most of her weight, all too familiar patches of inky blackness encroaching her vision. No. She would not faint. She wouldn't ruin her chance with Naruto. A blush settled on Naruto's cheek as he felt Hinata lean against him for support. The gentle warmth in his stomach seemed to flare and he could feel the same pseudo-hunger he had felt whilst hugging Kyuubi-chan. He slowly, and reluctantly, moved out of the hug. Hinata swayed slightly at the sudden loss of Naruto's support but caught herself before she fell, one thought still screaming through her mind as Naruto led her into the stand. Naruto-kun hugged me. Naruto-kun hugged me and I didn't faint. Hello, welcome to IK. Oh hey Naruto-chan. Tyuki grinned at his favorite customer. And who's this? He asked, his gaze flicking to Hinata then down to their still joined hands, his grin growing. Your girlfriend. Naruto didn't really understand the concept of girlfriend and boyfriend. No one had ever bothered to explain it to him, and having no friends his age meant it never really came up. He knew that was kind of like being best friends with someone, only it had to be a girl, and that most of the boys in his class, with the notable exception of Sasuke, seemed to want one. His face tinged a gentle pink and glanced at Hinata questioningly. Hinata met his gaze for a second before averting her eyes, her face deep red. I, if you want. She managed to stutter out. Tyuki shook his head slightly. He had seen the flash of confusion in Naruto's eyes when he had mentioned the word girlfriend. The little idiot obviously didn't understand relationships at all. He was making that girl's day and he didn't even know it. Naruto chuckled slightly and grinned. I guess she is then Tyuki-sama. He beamed. A soft thud interrupted Tyuki as Hinata collapsed in a faint, having Naruto say she was his girlfriend proving too much for her to handle. Naruto spun to look at her as he felt her hand go limp. Hinata. He called out, worried. Tyuki blinked and shook his head. I guess she really wanted to hear that. He chuckled softly. Naruto looked up, his eyes full of worry and fear. Hinata-chan's going to be okay, won't she? He asked, his tone pleading with him to say she was fine. Tyuki nodded. Don't worry, she'll be fine. She just fainted, she should wake up in a minute. Naruto frowned. But why'd she faint? Just randomly fainting can't be good. Ayame poked her head out of the kitchen. What's all the commotion? Tyuki grinned. Naruto's little girlfriend just fainted. Ayame's face broke into a massive grin. Naruto-chan has a girlfriend now? She asked, gently pushing her father aside and peering over the counter at the unconscious girl on the floor. Wow. You got good taste, Naruto-chan. She giggled. A hyuga. She added, raising an eyebrow slightly. Weren't all hyugas supposed to be cold and emotionless? Naruto grinned slightly. Yeah, Hinata-chan's great. She really nice. He announced. A soft groan from the girl in question caught his attention and his eyes snapped back to her, relief flooding his system. She's waking up. Hinata groaned as she opened her eyes, the world swimming back into focus. Her eyes skimmed other Ayame and Tyuki as before locking onto Naruto, who had a small relieved smile on his face. You okay, Hinata-chan? He asked gently, offering a hand to help her up. Hinata nodded meekly. Yes, she said, avoid Naruto's eyes, not wanting to see the annoyance and anger that would invariably be there. After all, she had ruined their date by fainting. Naruto's grin grew a little. Good. You worried me for a bit there. He gave a small chuckle as he pulled Hinata to her feet, the sudden movement eliciting a startled squeak from the girl. So shall we place an order? He asked, flopping down onto his usual stool. Hinata moved slowly and sat herself down next to Naruto. He wasn't mad. How could he not be mad after she proved her weakness by fainting? Can I have a shrimp ramen, please? She asked, giving herself a small pat on the back for almost getting through the entire sentence without stuttering. Tyuki nodded. Alright then, coming right up. He glanced at Ayame. Go start preparing. Ayame pouted. Butu-san. She whined, sighing when all she got from her father was a glare. Fine. She huffed, but you better fill me in on all the dirt afterwards. Tyuki chuckled and shook his head. Fine. Fine. Now go and start preparing the nice girl's food. Ayame nodded and slipped back into the kitchen as Tyuki turned back to face the couple. Naruto had clearly found their exchange rather amusing whilst Hinata's blush had climbed a few notches. So Naruto-chan, what'll you have? Hinata stifled a giggle as she heard Tyuki call him Naruto-chan. Naruto grinned. 2 miso ramen please, he asked. Tyuki nodded. Gotcha. He smiled, turning to the kitchen. They'll be ready in a bit. Naruto nodded, smiling at Tyuki's back as he relaxed against the table. Glancing at Naruto, Hinata noticed for the first time a slight difference in his posture. Normally he was tense and alert, as if ready to defend himself or run at any time. Even when he appeared relaxed, Hinata could see the same tension there. But here he was totally relaxed. He had dropped all his guards. She met his eyes. Usually they were bright orbs of determination and energy, but here they were different. She could see happiness, true happiness, in his eyes for the first time, along with the determination that had made her fall for him, along with what she fervently hoped was love, but that was tinged with a hardness and pain she had only seen in a few other eyes. She frowned lightly. What had he been through to make his eyes like that? Maybe it was connected to his constant readiness to fight. Naruto opened his mouth to speak, but Kyuubi spoke up before he could. Don't ask her about that. Naruto frowned slightly. Why? Just fainting for no reason can't be healthy. Kyuubi sighed slightly. Just trust me asking her. A long yawn broke up her sentence, informing Naruto that she had probably only recently woken up. Will only embarrass her, she said, adding silently that it would probably also induce another faint. Naruto gave a small nod. Oh, okay. He agreed, turning his attention back to Hinata. Hey Hinata. He spoke up. Hinata jumped slightly as Naruto's voice broke her out of her train of thought. Yes. She replied, turning to face him. Naruto grinned at her. Can you tell me a bit about you? He chuckled and rubbed the back of his head, his hand passing over a few of the lumps he had obtained trying to ceiling walk earlier. I mean, I know you're really kind and everything, but not much else. He admitted silently, hoping she would tell him about why she had fainted without him needing to ask and embarrassing her. Hinata blushed. WH. What do I? W. Want to know N. Naruto-kun. Naruto paused for a second before giving her a massive grin. Everything. He declared happily. Hinata blushed. She had no idea where to start. No one had shown a proper interest in her since her mum. She mumbled quietly. Well, I'm the H. Hyuga heir. Naruto grinned and shook his head slightly. I want to know about you, not your family. He paused, like what's your favorite color or jutsu or things like that. Hinata's blush climbed a little and she nodded her understanding. Taking a few moments to compose herself, she opened her mouth to speak when Tyuki cut across. Hey, you two love birds, food's up. Love birds. Hinata squeaked. Naruto just laughed gently, although a faint pink tinge did take root on his own cheeks, his face breaking into a large grin as Tyuki placed the 2 bowls of ramen he ordered in front of him. Woo! Ramen! He shouted happily. Thanks, Tyuki-sama. Hinata nodded. Thanks, she said, giving a semi-formal bow, part of her now wondering why Naruto had called him Tyuki-sama. He never called anyone sama. He even referred to the Hokage as old man. She giggled to herself. It was probably because Tyuki-san controlled Naruto-kun's ramen consumption. Tyuki grinned and laughed. Don't mention it, it's my pleasure to cook for you too. Now eat up. Naruto nodded, pulling a pair of chopsticks out of the holder and spinning them around his fingers with a practiced ease before separating them and pausing, his head bowed slightly. Itadaki masu, he said reverently before giving a grin and attacking the meal with vigor. Hinata watched this display with something between amusement and reverence. She had been a little surprised when he remembered to say Itadaki masu. She was sure he didn't know anything about table manners from the way he ate at the academy. Taking her own pair of chopsticks, she gingerly separated them and gave her own quiet, Itadaki masu, before making her own start on the meal. Naruto stole glances at Hinata as he shoveled ramen into his mouth. She was eating slowly and gracefully with a dignified air in stark contrast to Naruto's fast, undignified method. You know you don't have to be so formal. Naruto spoke up with a grin. Hinata blushed slightly. She had always been taught to eat like this. The concept of eating like Naruto was almost alien to her. This is how I always eat, she stammered. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Really? He asked, his surprise evident in his tone. You mean you never eat like this? He asked before shoveling another load of ramen into his mouth with an over-exaggerated movement, leaving a 3 noodles dangling out of his mouth for a few seconds before he sucked them in with a grin. Hinata gave a soft giggle, causing Naruto's grin to widen. If anyone had eaten like that in the Hyuga house, they probably would have been severely punished. No, she said, shaking her head slightly. Naruto's eyes widened. Not even when you're in a hurry. Hinata paused for a second in thought. She almost always left enough time for everything, so she was hard-pressed to recall when she was last in a hurry, and even when she ate the same as she was eating now, just faster. No, she said finally. Naruto shook his head in disbelief. Wow, he muttered to himself before grinning and looking up at Hinata. Try it. Hinata gave Naruto an incredulous look. What? Naruto gave her another wide grin. Try eating like that. He repeated, it's fun. He added after a short pause, his grin growing a little more. Hinata blushed. She was taught to always be dignified and controlled, and that would be anything but. She glanced at Naruto, who was watching her expectantly. I guess, she finally said softly, turning her gaze to the mostly full bowl of ramen. Gently lifting the bowl, she brought it up close to her lips and paused for a second, taking a deep calming breath before attacking the meal with gusto. A small smile forming. Naruto-kun had been right, this was fun. Naruto smiled. See, it's not that bad, is it? He chuckled. Hinata froze, her blush rapidly climbing through the various shades of red, Naruto's voice reminding her where she was and who was watching her pig out on the ramen. Sorry, she mumbled, putting the bowl down and lowering her head in shame. Naruto chuckled louder. Nah, don't worry about it, Hinata-chan. He waved her apology off. I do it all the time, and anyway, you looked like you were enjoying yourself. Hinata nodded softly as though ashamed to admit that she had. It had felt good knowing she was going against her father and her clan's teachings, and even better that it had been Naruto who had convinced her to do it. She made a silent vow to herself that from now on she and Naruto would do what they wanted, clan and village be damned. Naruto glanced at Hinata. You okay? He asked, worry seeping into his voice. Hinata glanced at Naruto, his voice snapping her out of her internal rant, her shyness returning at full force. Why? Yeah, she muttered. Naruto gave a small sigh of relief. Hey, you kinda zoned out for a bit there. Sorry, she replied, staring at her, now mostly empty, bowl of ramen to avoid looking Naruto in the eyes. I was thinking. Naruto nodded. About what? Hinata blanched. There was no way she could repeat what she had been thinking. Now that her brief moment of confidence had passed, she couldn't even believe those thoughts had been her own. They seemed more like something she would expect from Naruto-kun's mouth. She mumbled. Naruto stopped eating and turned on his stool, giving Hinata his full attention. Komon, tell me. He said enthusiastically. Hinata was silent for a moment, mentally dredging up all the courage she could, her head rising so her eyes met with Naruto's. You. You. You, she finally managed to get out, although it was barely more than a whisper. Naruto blinked in surprise. Us. He echoed. Hinata gave a slow nod, her blushing once again rising to fever pitch. What about us? Naruto inquired. Part of Hinata was relieved on hearing the confusion evident in Naruto's tone. What if he rejected her feelings? It was probably better that he didn't know. Yes, then they could remain friends. She'd be happy just remaining friends. As long as it meant she could stay by her Naruto-kun. However, another part of her wanted to cry. She had finally called up the courage to tell her crush how she felt. Kinda, and he hadn't understood. It could be years before she was able to pluck up the courage to say it again. Hinata-chan. 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 Once again Naruto broke her out of her train of thought. Hinata blinked and shook her head to rid any remnants of those thoughts. Why? Why? Yes. Naruto laughed loudly and gave Hinata a huge grin, her blush rising a shade in response. Wow, they must have been some really good thoughts for you to zone out again. He declared happily. Now you have to tell me. Hinata flushed and looked down. W. Just happy that you're my B. She gave a soft sigh. Friend. She finished, finding herself unable to call Naruto her boyfriend. No matter how much she wanted to. Even the thought made a few black patches dance in her vision, however she clung to her consciousness, desperately determined not to faint again. Naruto's grin grew a little and a soft red tinge appeared on his cheeks. I'm really glad you're my friend too, Hinata-chan. He replied softly, a tenderness in his voice that Hinata had never heard before. Hinata swayed slightly, more patches of black flashing in her field of vision. She clenched her fists, digging her nails into the soft flesh of her palms, relying on the pain to keep her conscious. She gave him a smile as she turned to finish off her ramen. Naruto, having finished off his last bowl a little while back, after a brief debate with herself, she picked up the bowl quickly, wolfing down the food. Tyuki shook his head and chuckled. Naruto-chan, it seems you've corrupted your little girlfriend with your sloppy eating. Hinata gave a startled eep, almost choking on the last of her ramen as she registered the fact that Tyuki had seen her eating in such an undignified manner. Naruto gave Tyuki a massive smile. I was just showing Hinata-chan the joys of eating ramen properly. Tyuki laughed. She was eating it properly to begin with. You just untaught her table manners. He retorted, his tone betraying his amusement. A red-faced Hinata opened her mouth to apologize to Tyuki for her lack of manners, but Naruto cut across her. HMPH, what use are manners anyway? He responded, crossing his arms stubbornly. It's more fun to eat my way. Faster too, so what's the problem with it? Tyuki shook his head again. Fine, fine. Eat however you want, he said, waving the argument off. Naruto's grin grew slightly and he turned to Hinata. Don't worry about it. Tyuki-sama was just being a stick in the mud, he said, sending a playful glare at the ramen chef, who just gave a small snort of laughter at his favorite customer's antics. Hinata giggled gently. Oh, okay. Naruto gave Hinata a quick smile before turning his attention back to Tyuki, his hand dropping to his trouser pocket to retrieve his Gamma-chan. So how much do I owe ya? Tyuki thought about it for a moment before shaking his head. Don't worry about it, this one's on the house. He gave them both a broad grin. Naruto's face split into a wide grin. Awesome. Thanks a bunch, Tyuki-sama. You're the best. He cried out happily. Hinata bowed as low as the table would allow. Thank you, Tyuki-sama, she said politely, a small smile on her own face. Tyuki just smiled. Don't worry about it, it's nice to serve someone with manners for a change. His eyes flicked to Naruto, who stuck out his tongue, forcing Hinata to bite back a giggle that threatened to burst from her mouth. Just promise me you won't let the little baka damage your manners any further. Hinata blushed and nodded. Why? Yes, I page. P. Promise, she mumbled quietly. Tyuki chuckled and nodded. Good. Kami knows what we do with another Naruto running around. Naruto suddenly burst out laughing, Hinata and Tyuki turning to look at him. What is it Naruto-kun. Hinata asked slightly apprehensively. Naruto bit the inside of his cheek trying to stem his chuckles. Sorry, I just had an image of Hinata-chan, dressed like me, with my hairstyle. His speech was interrupted by small snorts of laughter. Tyuki laughed as the image formed in his head as well. Hinata gave a small squeak as she attempted to withdraw into her coat, her cheeks burning with a heavy blush. Naruto, once he had calmed down enough to allow coherent speech, turned to Hinata. Hey, Hinata-chan, you okay? He asked, a little worried he had hurt her feelings. Hinata nodded softly. Why? Yes, she mumbled. Naruto paused for a second. Hey, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings or anything. Forgive me. Hinata felt her face heating up further as she realized how close their faces, and more importantly their lips, were. She gave a slow nod. Why? Yes. Naruto smiled. Great. He exclaimed happily before pausing. So are you coming out of your coat? Hinata gave a meek nod, straightening up, although part of her wanted to say no just to see what Naruto did. Naruto stood up and stretched, giving a small satisfied grunt as he cracked his back. Walk you home, he offered. Hinata gave an enthusiastic nod. Please. She squeaked happily, sliding off the stool and walking over to Naruto. Naruto smiled at Hinata and thought about it for a second before reaching down to take her hand, Hinata giving a small yelp and stumbling slightly as Naruto took her hand. As they stepped outside, Hinata noticed Naruto's posture change as he slipped back into his guarded state. The happiness and emotion in his eyes appeared to dim somewhat. Hinata, however, could still make most of them out, but she couldn't see any hints of the pain she had seen there in his unguarded moments. Tyuki watched the pair walking off down the street and chuckled, shaking his head. If Naruto really doesn't know she likes him, then he's more of a baka than I thought. He mumbled to himself before turning and heading into the back of the store, giving a small sigh as he remembered he would have to tell his daughter exactly what happened during Naruto's date. Naruto and Hinata soon found themselves outside the Hyuga Manor. Too soon in both of their opinions. Naruto gave her a small honest smile, letting go of her hand. Goodbye, I guess. He offered, not really sure what to do or say. Hinata nodded, glancing down at her hand that was still tingling from Naruto's touch. Really enjoyed myself today, she said softly, her head bowed slightly in a futile attempt to hide the blush that had been gracing her cheeks the entire trip home. Naruto gave her another, larger, grin. Yeah, I had a lot of fun too. He replied, we should hang out more often, Hinata-chan. Hinata saw Naruto's eyes return to their unguarded state as they talked. It made her knees weak to know that Naruto considered her someone he could drop his guard around, especially since, as far as she knew, there were only two other people who saw him like that. Why? Yes. She agreed gently, not daring to think this could actually be happening. It all just seemed so unreal. Naruto nodded. Okay, I guess I'll see you at school Monday. Hinata nodded the affirmative, a serene little smile on her face. They stood there for a few seconds in an awkward silence, neither really knowing what to do. Naruto finally moved forward and drew Hinata into a hug. Hinata stiffened in his arms for a second, a small squeak escaping her lips, before relaxing with a content sigh. Oh, Naruto-kun, she mumbled to herself. Naruto gave a soft chuckle as he heard her squeezing her gently. He smiled. Well, I guess this really is goodbye then, Hinata-chan, he said. Hinata nodded, swaying slightly on her feet, the familiar patches of darkness haunting her vision. Goodbye, Naruto-kun, she said tenderly. Naruto nodded, slowly unwrapping his arms from around Hinata, reluctant to end the close contact, giving her another small smile as he turned to leave. Hinata stood there for a second. Wait. She suddenly blurted out. Naruto turned around to face her. Yes. Hinata blushed heavily, her surge of confidence failing as her eyes met Naruto. She took a few small steps to close the gap between them, her blush growing all the while. Naruto watched her with interest, wondering what she was going to do or say. Hinata's blush reached fever pitch as she leant forward, desperately calling on all her courage, giving Naruto a quick kiss on the cheek before turning and rushing into the Hyuga complex, and promptly fainting on the lawn. Naruto's face lit up with a blush that almost rivaled Hinata's as his hand raised to touch the cheek she had kissed. She kissed me, he mumbled to himself. It took Naruto about a minute to snap out of his daze, and get the mad blush on his cheeks under control. A soft smile etched onto his features as he made his way back to his house. Hinata groaned as she pushed herself up off the grass, raising to her feet, a gentle frown on her features. How did I end up unconscious on the grass? She pondered. It was a few seconds later when the answer hit her, her face immediately lighting up as she stumbled, almost ending up face first on the lawn once again. That's right. I kissed Naruto-kun. Admittedly, it had been on the cheek rather than the lips as she had originally intended, but nevertheless she had kissed him. A happy squeal fought to escape her throat, but she forced it back, knowing that such a show of emotion would be frowned upon, doubly so since she was the Hyuga heir. Walking inside, she made her way to her room in a pseudo-daze before collapsing onto her bed and hugging her pillow tightly to her chest. Naruto-kun, she sighed wistfully, squeezing the pillow harder. Naruto kicked the front door closed behind him, the silly smile still stuck on his face. So, have a good date. Kyuubi spoke up. Naruto jumped at the sound of her voice, he had almost forgotten she was there. Yeah, he replied happily. Flopping down onto the couch, he shut his eyes, finding himself almost immediately in his mindscape. He frowned to himself, wasn't getting here supposed to be harder than this? Shrugging it off, he decided to ask Kyuubi-chan. This time the gates were just around the corner, barely a minute's walk. Again he frowned. It appeared that he was both getting here more easily and getting better at appearing where he wanted to. While these things were not bad, Naruto still wanted to know why it was happening. Hey Kyuubi-chan, he declared happily, waving to her as he walked through the bars. Kyuubi smiled happily. Good afternoon Naruto-sama. She replied, so how did that date go? I want all the dirt. Naruto frowned, his confusion over the ease with which he arrived disappearing. But you should know. Can't you see my memories and stuff? Kyuubi giggled softly. Yes, I can. She replied, but I limited my link with you once I woke up. I realized you were on a date. I also wasn't going to look at those memories unless you gave me specific permission. Naruto nodded. Oh. He muttered, confusion evident in his tone. Kyuubi shook her head and laughed. I didn't want to intrude in your time with Hinata-san, it's between you and her. Although I did keep a little of the link up so I knew when the date was over or if you got into trouble I would have been able to help. Naruto nodded and gave her a genuine smile. Thanks. He said, walking forward and giving Kyuubi an, all too brief, hug. Kyuubi gave Naruto a serene smile. It's no problem. She assured him gently. So how did the date go? Naruto's face split back into the huge grin he had been wearing when he got home. It went awesome. Hinata-chan is really nice. Kyuubi nodded, glad that Naruto was happy with Hinata. He definitely deserved the happiness, and she. Naruto continued before trailing off a light blush on his cheeks as he averted his eyes from Kyuubi's to try and hide his embarrassment. Kyuubi leant forward eagerly. If it got Naruto of all people to blush, then she had to know. What did she do? She demanded a little more forcefully than she had intended, but her excitement had gotten the better of her. Naruto backed off slightly, a look of fear flashing through his eyes before he reined it in. He knew Kyuubi-chan wouldn't hurt him, but her tone of voice had reminded him of things he would much rather forget. He took a moment to make sure his voice would be purged on any hint of the fear that had coursed through him a moment ago before replying. Well, he mumbled at first. She kissed me. He said bluntly, the faint blush reappearing on his cheeks, along with a small smile, as he said it. Kyuubi gave a small internal awe, but the prankster in her just wouldn't let this opportunity pass by. On the lips, she questioned. Honestly, she hadn't expected the shy girl to do anything like this. Naruto must have had a big effect on her. Naruto went a deep red. What? He spluttered. Kyuubi tried to hold back her laughter but ultimately failed, her laughter refusing to be subdued as it burst from her lips. Naruto's reaction was just priceless. I'll take that as a no, she added with a slight smirk gracing her features. Naruto shook his head vigorously. No. She didn't. He confirmed, just on the cheek. He added as an afterthought in a calmer tone. Kyuubi nodded, although her smirk grew slightly. Still, I didn't think she had it in her. She must really like you to do that. Naruto grinned. Of course she likes me. We're friends. Kyuubi gave a small sigh. No, not like, but more like. You know the difference between like and like, right? Naruto's blank look was really all the answer Kyuubi needed. Huh. He muttered, that makes no sense. Like means like. Doesn't it? Kyuubi gave another sigh. She really didn't want to explain this kind of thing to Naruto, there had to be another way. A small evil grin formed on her face as she made a plan. I know how you can learn the difference. Naruto perked up. How? He asked energetically. Kyuubi's grin grew slightly. Alright, just go to the bookstore and get one of each of the books by Jiraiya. Naruto frowned. Reading. That's boring, he pouted. Kyuubi giggled. Trust me, these books aren't. Oh. And the shopkeeper probably won't sell them to you, so you also get to practice stealth. Naruto's face dropped slightly. He assumed that he wouldn't be sold them because of Kyuubi-chan, but perked up as she continued. Okay, so I'll go get the books now. Kyuubi shrugged. Go when you feel you're ready, but come back in here once you get home with the books. Naruto nodded and grinned. Alright, a mission. I won't let you down, Kyuubi-chan. See you in a bit. He pulled Kyuubi into a quick hug before giving her another big grin and fading from view. Kyuubi watched his figure disappear with a soft smirk on her face. Oh yes, this would certainly be fun. Naruto stretched slightly as his mind returned to the physical world. For some reason his limbs were always a bit stiff after talking to Kyuubi-chan, so what do I have to work with? He mumbled to himself, taking a mental inventory of what he had. He could use the henge, but his one broke at the slightest provocation. His kawarimi was perhaps the only jutsu he could do well. His bunshin were appalling and he knew it. He could also wall walk after Kyuubi-chan's training the other day. As for ninja tools, he had 4 smoke bombs and a pack of shuriken. He also had a few storage scrolls for food. The old man had given them to him so he could keep his food fresh after the fridge broke. A soft frown furrowed his brow as he sat down to try and work out exactly how he was going to do this. Calling up all his experience from pranks and all his cunning, he supposed he could have just asked Kyuubi-chan, but he wanted to make her proud of him. Naruto had a small smile on his face as he walked into the bookstore. Most of the people in the store giving him hate or disgust-filled glares, and a few were talking at him, but he brushed them off. He was on a mission and he wouldn't let them break his concentration. Inwardly he smiled. Last night whilst he had been sleeping, Kyuubi had drawn him into the seal and taught him the importance of being able to ignore emotions when on a mission. This was his first attempt at trying it, but his years of experience concealing his true emotions made this come naturally to the young ninja in training. Looking around, he located a shelf with the books he was supposed to get on. Scanning his eyes along them, he counted 18 books in total. A small satisfied grin grew on his face. The single storage scroll he had decided to bring should be enough to hold them. Turning around, he left the shop, his small smile still in place. The books were all nice and close together. He walked around the streets for a few minutes before making his way back towards the store to carry out his plan. He stood a short distance from the door and took a small calming breath, palming a smoke bomb in one hand and a rock in the other. With a small grin, he put his plan into action, tossing the rock at the bookcase he knew contained the Ika books, shortly followed by the smoke bomb. There was a yell as the smoke bomb went off, the thick particles providing Naruto with the veil he needed to carry out his plan. By the time the smoke had cleared, Naruto was already heading for home, now almost full, storage scroll under one arm. The only evidence he had been in the store at all was a stone lying on the floor near the bookcase of Ika books. Naruto laughed happily as he vaulted along the rooftops, occasionally using his chakra to slow down, change direction, or ascend higher. His plan had gone perfectly. "I got the books," he declared happily. "Good going, so how'd you do it?" Kyuubi responded, Naruto's grin growing tenfold as he heard the hint of pride he had been preparing for in her voice. Naruto paused, sitting on a rooftop in the shadow of a chimney. "Well, I threw a rock in along with a smoke bomb for cover, then kawarimied with the rock to get near the books. I grabbed a few books before kawariming back outside using the stone." He had a small grin on his face, proud that his plan had worked. "I basically just repeated that until I had all the books you told me to get." Kyuubi smiled to herself. Naruto might be a little dense sometimes. Well, most of the time, but he definitely possessed a great deal of cunning and he thought outside the box. "So do you still want me to come in and see you when I get home?" he added, and he stood up and took off again. Kyuubi nodded, a soft smile on her face, feeling a little silly as she once again reminded herself Naruto couldn't see her. "Yes," she said tenderly. "I like being with you, and though we can talk like this, it's not the same," she confessed. If Naruto could have seen her eyes, he would have spotted the spark of hope in them, along with love and a little, badly concealed, lust. Naruto's face wore an almost serene grin as the warm sensation he still couldn't place danced through his body. "I know what you mean," he said, pulling a face. "It's much nicer to talk to you in person, 'cause then I can see your face," he declared happily. Kyuubi fought a losing battle with a blush as she heard that. "Thanks," she said, her voice gentle and surprisingly soft. "So anyway," Naruto spoke up, "what exactly's in these books anyway?" he asked, patting the scroll absently. "And why'd you say they'd be fun to read?" Kyuubi bit back the giggles that rose from her throat, fearing they would give her away. "If I told you, it would spoil the surprise now, wouldn't it?" she pointed out. Naruto frowned. "But I hate surprises," he whined. "Tell me now." In his experience, surprises were never ever a good thing, and more often than not ended up with him in a hospital. If it weren't for the fact that Kyuubi was sealed inside him, he certainly wouldn't have continued unless he was certain she meant him no harm. Kyuubi almost winced at his response. She understood perfectly why he didn't like surprises. "Just trust me, okay?" she said tenderly, almost pleadingly. Naruto nodded. "I do trust you, Kyuubi-chan," he replied, his voice low but full of conviction. "Don't ever think I don't. It's just it's hard, you know. After everything that's happened." He sighed, frowning at himself. Couldn't he say it better than that? Kyuubi's face split into a small smile. "Thanks, and don't worry, I understand." There was a slight pause before she continued. "After all, I saw it all." She continued silently, adding, "And I caused it all." Naruto gave a small frustrated sigh. He had heard the guilt in her tone even if she hadn't voiced it. He'd told her before, it wasn't her fault. Why did she continue to blame herself? He just couldn't work it out. His brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to unravel that puzzle, his body following the route home more or less on autopilot, his conscious mind only intervening when he realized he could take shortcuts by utilizing his newfound wall-walking abilities. Naruto sighed as he sat on his sofa, Despite thinking about it the whole way home, he was still no closer to working out why Kyuubi-chan seemed to blame herself for the villagers' actions. It just made no sense. Anyone with half a brain should have realized the fault lay with the villagers, not with her. He gave another frustrated sigh, filing it as a girl thing and returning his attention to the scroll of books he had dumped next to him on the sofa. So you going to let me know why these books are interesting? There was a long pause as Naruto listened for a response. When none was forthcoming, he shook his head. Well, there's one way to find out, he muttered to himself, putting a hand on the sealing scroll and releasing the books with a short burst of chakra. Leaning back against the sofa, a small contented sigh escaping his lips as he did so, Naruto grabbed a book from the pile at random and inspected the cover with a raised eyebrow. The title, Ika Ika Paradise. Steamy Love, was displayed in large font whilst beneath it there was the image of two people, both heavily chibified, one woman whose modesty was retained only by a towel wrapped loosely around her body running from a muscular man, who was also garbed only in a towel. Naruto's brow crinkled. This book looked familiar somehow. After a moment's thought he remembered spotting it in the old man's office on a few occasions along with other books from this series. Well, if the old man read it, then they might be able to help him become Hokage. With that thought he eagerly opened the book and started reading. His enthusiasm quickly faded however, and he sighed. Yes, there are lots of girls in the onsen, he mused, but does there need to be a long description of each of them? He snorted. He knew what girls looked like, he wasn't blind, and anyway how was this going to help him deal with Hinata? And what exactly was it he was supposed to realize about having a girlfriend? Shaking himself from his thoughts he sighed and reapplied his attention to the book as he read. A soft blush appeared on his cheek which grew stronger as he continued. He couldn't believe how much there was to kissing and hugging. He turned the page once more and froze, his eyes widening as his blush increased tenfold. Aro Kitsune. He screamed accusingly, throwing the book away as if burnt, and pointing a finger at the air in front of him. The only reply he got was the raucous laughter echoing around his head and a strange tug on his mind, which he was in no position to resist. He felt his consciousness fading and his vision went dark for a second before Kyuubi's cage faded into view. Kyuubi was leaning against a wall for support, laughing. You should have seen your face, she gasped between her laughs. Naruto frowned. You gave me porn, you perv, he yelled. Kyuubi grinned. You seemed to enjoy it, she replied, forcing down her laughter with some effort. I did not, Naruto yelled defensively. Kyuubi smirked softly. Oh really? She asked, her eyes flicking to his crotch just long enough to be noticeable before lifting back to his face. I think you did. Naruto blanched, clamping his hands over his crotch and looking down to find that there was no tent in his trousers or anything to betray the little part of him that had enjoyed those books. The sound of Kyuubi's renewed laughter cut across his thoughts. He looked up and glared at her. Baka hentai. Kyuubi's response was almost totally illegible through her laughter. You, only if, proves, enjoyed, was all Naruto managed to decipher. Naruto frowned softly, trying to maintain his anger against the smile that threatened to form on his face. He always did appreciate a good prank even if he was the target of it. Besides, the book hadn't been entirely unhelpful. He had a better idea of more intimate hugs and kisses, although he didn't feel he was ready to use any of this knowledge yet. You know this means war, he said offhandedly. Kyuubi smirked softly. I live in you, what are you going to do to me? She responded, clearly amused. Naruto gave her a scheming grin. You forget whose head this is. I can control reality in here. He concentrated for a second and a bucket of water materialized, floating in the air just above Kyuubi's head. Kyuubi looked up. You wouldn't, she said simply. Naruto's grin grew larger. Wouldn't I? He asked as another two buckets appeared. Kyuubi knew a losing battle when she saw it. Alright, I give. Truce. So offered a hand to Naruto. Naruto gave a silent sigh of relief. A prank war with a being inside his head would probably quickly get him thrown in the loony bin. Alright, truce. He agreed, shaking her hand and giving her a small smile. Kyuubi grinned. So what are you going to do with those books now you know what they are? She asked with something halfway between amusement and honest curiosity. Naruto went silent as he thought before grinning. I'll probably read them anyway, he finally announced. Kyuubi giggled. Oh. And why would you do that? Naruto shrugged. They might actually be helpful in the long run. He answered, besides I went through all that trouble to get them, I'm not just going to throw them away. Kyuubi gave a low grin. So you do like them then? She asked. Naruto flushed softly. I guess. He replied, they were okay. I can see why the old man might read them. Kyuubi smirked. The Hokage. I bet he just reads them because he's too old to get any. She chuckled. Naruto pulled a face. Well, thanks for that mental image. He said sarcastically, even with the limited information of the first few paragraphs of the scene he had read, he still really didn't want to think about the Hokage doing that. Kyuubi giggled harder. I aim to please. Naruto shook his head to try and clear his head of the lingering images, with only moderate success. Well, anyway, can we do some more training? Kyuubi giggled happily. Sure, why not? She agreed. What do you want to learn? Naruto grinned like Christmas had come early. I want to learn to walk on ceilings, he announced. Kyuubi grinned. Sure, it's not that hard. Naruto frowned. It is hard. He rubbed his head, feeling the lumps from that morning, and I've got the bumps to prove it. Kyuubi just giggled. Don't worry, you'll definitely be able to do it by the time you go to bed. She gave him a grin that promised suffering. Naruto shivered. Oh boy, he mumbled quietly to himself. Hey everyone, just wanted to say thanks for all the faves, alerts and especially the reviews, you guys are awesome.